next is another session on the supply chain. Just please remember you can ask questions because there will be a Q&A after this session. You just need to scan the QR code in the program or up here. And for the session, I'd like to ask Walid Oulman, Stéphane-Alain, Riou, Florent, Violain to join me on stage. And we are already connected to Sam Salustro in the US. Hello. Do you want to? Oh, yeah. Oh, we've got one. Do you want to sit down or, yeah? Maybe if it's the three of you, it's maybe better now. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Sam. Can you hear us?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Thank you for connecting to us from Wilmington, Delaware, on the US East Coast. So, Florent Violain, you're team lead stakeholder management at a German developer, RW, and you have brought a few figures to describe the bottlenecks in the market, haven't you? And you've got slides. Does that work? No? Do you want to talk about the figures?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got, as you all know, we've got a huge target in Europe and in the world in terms of deploying more offshore wind power, more offshore wind turbines, where by 2030 we will have to get 165 gigawatt about, and we are just above 30 gigawatts right now. So the increasing target is huge, and the present supply chain is not able to supply what is required for this increase. Just as an example, the UK itself has more than twice the installing target than the French, than France, and the same for Netherlands, and that's excluding China, obviously. So we've got a strong need for more capacity to be able to deploy this, and that's what we are going to try to tackle.
Is there any solution on the table? Do we have an idea how to go about this?
Yes, for us, the most important is the starting point, is what is a seed to a good project, is bid criteria and auction design. That's, let's say, auction design is a seed that is next going to become a big tree. And if you don't have great, good auction design, sane auction design, then you struggle to be able to properly develop the project. So for us, the first point is being able to fight like never-ending low prices on auctions, and we are very happy, let's say, with the French auction design with double-sided CFD, which is indexed on inflation, whereas in some markets, the negative bids are putting a lot of pressure on the industry and then on the supply chain. And of course, after this, you also need to increase the capacity, as we were saying, and one of the best way to do that is also what is happening in France right now, is supporting the supply chain with direct investment to the supply chain, to the manufacturers. And in France, we've got the crédit, the C3IV, which is a way to be able, a tax credit, which is able to support the industrial investment into actual manufacturing sites. And then you also need new capacity, obviously, in terms of ports and so on, basically. And of course, we also need for the industrial companies to invest properly, you need proper visibility. And that's about planning the coming development and sticking with the plan, being able to identify how much, when, and what is going to be required on which area in different areas in France, different areas in Europe. So the investors can understand the market, the investors can follow and support the market, support the manufacturers. So then the capacity is there to be able to deploy what the developers need to deploy.
You were early on talking about tender criteria. How important are non-price criteria for you? And what kind of non-price criteria could make sense?
Well, for us, some of the most important non-price criteria to be able to get a proper level playing field and to be able to support high quality bids, high quality projects are robustness criteria, making sure that all the selected offers on the different tenders, whereas with the French type of tenders or the German or UK type of tenders, making sure that all the projects are starting with a good base. So robustness is key, technical robustness, environmental topics, supply chain topics as well, to make sure that the project can be delivered without putting too much pressure on the stakeholders and on the supply chain.
You were also talking about support for the local supply chain. Is it always a good thing to protect the European supply chain or even the US supply chain for you?
Well, as we mentioned, there is a strong need to increase the capacity. There is a strong need to get more projects online and more wind turbine, foundations, vessels, services. And the way to do that is not to cut what is already existing, is not to reduce what we already get from Europe, from Asia, from different areas in the world, but to increase the size of the market, to be able to increase the size of the supply chain as well. So protectionism, in some cases, could also reduce the size of the market, could put some project at risk. And then if you reduce the size of the market, you simply cannot get enough investment in the manufacturing and then enough deployment of wind farm as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Florent Violain. Let's bring you in, Stéphane-Alain. You're offshore director at Spain-based Iberdrola. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And your company has been developing the 496 megawatt offshore wind farm Saint-Brieuc off Brittany here in France. That project has partly been hit by supply chain issues, but only partly so, right?
Yes. If maybe part of the audience were there 20 years ago when we started this new industry in France, it was a very enthusiastic period. Everybody was happy to start this new industry. And finally, it takes us maybe 12, 15 years to develop these offshore wind farms in France. And of course, there is a lot of work done by the development teams for all the developers in France to prepare the SMEs and the industry, the French industry, to these new wind farms. As an example, we had for Saint-Brieuc project, as you said, more than 300 jobs in Brest with Navantia about the jackets. It's about 120 French SMEs, Britain SMEs, who has worked on this project. And maybe one of the main issues they have encountered was about the qualification and the certification of the jobs. Of course, because it's new, it takes time to train people to have the right level of qualification, especially for welders or people like this. And it's something that has taken time to explain, and it's also an investment for these small companies. So it was maybe one of the main issues we have during this project. So we could say the most important to succeed is to have the right qualified persons at the right time for the construction, and it's something that all the developers can tell you about this local supply chain.
And as a developer, you also have other projects abroad. Your subsidiary Scottish Power is developing several East Anglia projects in the UK. And for these projects to go smoothly, you even have come up with a special procurement strategy, right? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, it's of course very important for a company like Iberdrola, Scottish Power, to be very close from the clusters. It's maybe the most important to be in a very close and frank relationship with industrial clusters. Of course, there is the work of mapping, sourcing all the competencies and companies. in order to have a huge database where you can choose the right company. We worked, and Scottish Power work in four pillars when they want to assist the SMEs to the contract with the wind farm. It's to be a company who has a green growth policy, the company who give some competencies in infrastructures and of course innovation, and to have all the skills really adapted to the works. So in all the procurement process, we have part of the contract with dedicated to local content, and we look for sustainability criteria, but also we have some penalties if the contractor is not respecting the engagement. So it's very important for us, and it's something that works well in UK, and it's something that, of course, we do in France and in other projects.
So we've got lots of strategies in place, but I understand you told me beforehand, at least, there's only so much a developer can do on their own, right? You need support from outside.
Yes, of course. And the offshore industry, it's a paradox. It's in the same time, it's a worldwide industry, European industry, and in the same time, it's very local because you are implemented in a specific bay or in a specific area. But I think the best way to ensure that the local content is in respect of what we promise to the different territories is to have respect of the calendars of the tenders, and it's a specific role of government, in fact. So SMEs and developers, they want to have full and planned orders to be sure to assume all these jobs, and in my opinion, it's the only way to create and to retain qualified jobs and people, and to be able to have the skill development in local employment. So we always work on that way, and the role of the authorities is at this stage very important, and especially in France at this moment. We will see in the coming weeks, but it's the only way, and I think it's the better way to have a high level of local content in all the wind farms in France.
And I suppose many here in this panel and here in the audience will agree with you on that point. Thank you so much, Stéphane-Alain from Spain-based Iberdrola. Now let's move across the big pond and talk with you. Talk to you, Salustro. You're Vice President of Strategic Communications at US Industry Association Oceanic Network. Welcome, or rather, good morning to you.
Good morning and good afternoon. I hope you're having a great conference over there.
I hope so too, yeah. So the US has ambitious targets for offshore wind, aiming for about 115 gigawatt by 2045, 2050. And yet, it has not managed to build up a substantial supply chain just yet. Why is that so?
Thanks for the question. You know, we're building real momentum here in the United States and really actively building out our market, developing our local capabilities. Our local companies are getting involved in the installation. They're actually leading the operations and maintenance activities now. And we do have 3 commercial scale projects under construction all at the same time, totaling about 4 gigawatts, and 2 more that should start later this year, early next year. And as you noted, the U.S. is a very large market. Demand is about 115 gigawatts. About 14 of those gigawatts have gone through the federal permitting process already and can be under construction at any time. And that demand has stimulated massive investments in the United States. We've tracked about $30 billion going into new ports, new vessels, new transmission systems, factory expansions, etc. But we haven't seen the heavy manufacturing at the scale that our market requires yet. The U.S. market was just getting off the ground when the global industry was hit by rising costs. That really pushed our first wave of projects to cancel or delay deployment. And unfortunately, much of our early manufacturing investments were really tied to this first wave of projects. So we have seen a lot of investment in the secondary and tertiary tiers of the U.S. supply chain, especially in U.S. steel production. We've seen, billions, upwards of 6 or 7 billion going into just that subsector, but that hasn't translated to new component factories doing blades or monopiles or towers, especially at the scale that our market demand profile really suggests, the U.S. could support.
Do you think that could be about to change, though?
Yeah, there are a number of factors that could make that change, and just in this year, we've seen a couple large new manufacturing investments. It's sort of suggesting that is actively changing right now. I noted that we had a number of projects that had to, cancel or delay. Those projects have largely reconfigured their contracts now and are beginning to move forward again. Second, confidence is really building in the federal permitting process. There was a completely new permitting process here in the United States. It wasn't really tested until around 2020, 2021. And every single day we see new federal permit approvals, new federal permit initiations. We have 4 auctions going on just this summer in the United States on 3 different coasts. So, every single day you're seeing a lot more confidence within the federal permitting system that there's transparency and regularity. And finally, the Inflation Reduction Act really hasn't started to flex its muscles in the United States. It was passed a couple years ago, but it's taken a long time to write the rules for such a massive bill. And the industry was really waiting to see exactly what some of these, finer points would actually be before making investments. We're seeing those rules be finalized in the last couple months here. And, it's important to remember the IRA, it is a law that really incentivizes development, but it also includes important tax credits for domestic manufacturing tied directly to, offshore wind components. So for every blade, for every tower, for every monopile produced, our manufacturers are getting some sort of tax credit.
Well, you were mentioning the Inflation Reduction Act. There's also obviously the Jones Act that requires that cargo is shipped by US vessels between US ports with offshore wind farms being considered as ports. Do you think that such pieces of legislation also have a negative impact on the industry? That's at least the perception of some people here in Europe. What do you say to that?
So it was interesting to hear the other panelists talk about, as a developer balancing local content requirements with, what they can deliver for their projects. And right now in the United States, what we're hearing most about is the local content barriers that we have between individual U.S. states. At this point, the Jones Act, it's just part of doing business in the United States. It has greatly incentivized U.S. shipbuilding. That's created a lot of jobs and created a lot of support within the United States. The Oceantic network has tracked about $2 billion going to new CTVs, SOVs, and installation vessels out of U.S. shipyards. And the Jones Act doesn't prevent foreign installation vessels from doing work offshore the United States. It just has prescriptive rules. The techniques that we're developing here, like barge feedering, could actually speed up construction, and you could actually see those in Europe as a result of this. But like I said, what we're hearing most about is the real opportunity right now in the United States to build that strong supply chain and build that robust market is finding a way to have individual states work more collaboratively together on local content. In the United States, each individual state is in charge of offtake policy, and because of that, we have upwards of 12 different states, all with different local requirements. So we're actively encouraging states to, either share those requirements or lower barriers between different states, so we can have larger regional markets, like a New England market of 4 states, all with more consistent or or some sort of recognition between the borders of local content requirements.
Do you feel that the states are listening to your advice? Are they more actively cooperating?
Absolutely. I think that, we're learning a lot in the United States actively. Every single day we're sort of learning something new about how to build offshore wind. And states, they want to be able to build offshore wind projects to supply clean power to their residents and the people within their states. So they're also actively looking to figure out how to incentivize development quickly while maximizing local job creation. And we are, like I said before, we are building a local supply chain on the ground. And a lot of these states are developing unique capabilities, and they want to ensure that there's future markets for those local capabilities. So just everyone's learning how to sort of build a stronger market, and we are seeing a lot more cooperation between states, between the federal government and states. This spring, 3 New England states actually banded together to do a joint offtake agreement with the hopes that they would, have a big enough offtake buy that they would lower the cost of energy, and on the other side, create a big enough market that they would bring in new investments. And we'll see the results of those this August or September.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that US perspective. Please bear with us for a bit longer. Now, Walid Oulman, hello. Is your microphone working?
Hello, good morning.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good
maybe,
afternoon,
No? Good
yeah,
morning
indeed.
to some, but now you're going to take us to the other end of the world, to Asia. You're head of ports and global industrialization at Spain-based developer BlueFloat Energy, and you brought some figures too.
Exact. So the figures have been shared during the last Wind Europe about the supply chain. And 2 of them are very relevant to somehow explain our dependence of the Asian supply chain. The first one is 70% of the components for the offshore wind are coming from Asia today, 70%. The second one is maybe much more relevant. 98% of the yard fabrication capacities are outside of Europe. So based on the 2 numbers, so you can see how we are very linked and completely dependent of the supply chain coming from Asia. And you can imagine that half of the components are coming from China, of course. So it's somehow why you can see EU thinking and putting in place some trade barrier to protect somehow the local supply chain.
But you're saying they're necessary to protect the supply chain, but is there a balance to be struck? I mean, they shouldn't be too high either, right?
Indeed, it's always a matter of balance. If it's low, you are just increasing the cost, and that's it. So without any real protection. If it's too high, it could represent a risk for our projects. So because you are basically increasing the cost, and in parallel, you don't have any more access to the fabrication capacities, the existing ones. So it's always a matter of how you can have the right protection and allowing the projects to be executed under the right conditions.
Right, okay. So obviously there are 2, floating, offshore wind energy has 2 parts, bottom fixed and floating. To what extent is that balance that you just talked about more important for one part or the other?
Yeah, it's not the same game for both. For the bottom fix, we can consider the supply chain as somehow a major supply chain. So now we are much more working on increasing the capacities. A new factory for monopiles, for jackets, new ones in UK and in other countries in Europe that will support the local project. But for the floating, it's a complete other game. It's creating a new supply chain. And back to my previous number, 98% of the yard fabrication capacities are outside of Europe. It's crazy. So you can have an idea about where we are in terms of level of our supply chain. But in parallel, it could be an amazing opportunity for our fabricators. So that could be in the south of Europe. So many projects in Italy, France, and Spain. Many fabricators that they are looking to this as an opportunity to increase the fabrication capacities. But we can also imagine other countries like Poland or that could support the effort.
There are also some surprising side effects, right? I mean, there was this announcement by China's Titan Wind Energy to set up a monopile factory for 300 million euros in Cuxhaven in Germany. Who would have thought that?
Yeah, it was a surprise and very good news coming from maybe one of the biggest Chinese supplier for section of towers and monopiles, and they make an announcement of 300 million investment in Cuxhaven in Germany for a monopile factory. But we have another example that is ongoing under development. It's from SIA, a supplier from South Korea, developing and building a new factory for monopiles in UK. The initial investment was 300 million. Now it's more than the double for many reasons. But yeah, so we can see many, and we have been approached by many Chinese suppliers to identify the countries where it's relevant to invest in Europe. It's a good signal, especially for floating. It's why we are confident that we can make it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Walid Oulman.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We have a few minutes for question and answers. I've got one that I've already received. Does anybody would like to ask a question in the audience? Would you like to ask each other a question? Is Sam still there? No? No? So I've got this one question on Tier 1 suppliers. So do you feel that the Tier 1 suppliers are in the starting blocks to set up the necessary infrastructure for the offshore wind energy boom, bottom fixed or floating? Are they happy and ready to make these investments, do you feel? Such as turbine makers?
Okay. Yeah, Taiwan, it's a special market because the local content requirements are very high and the expectations as well. But if you analyze the last projects, for example, for the fabrication of the jackets, the initial plan was to fabricate 66 jackets for one offshore wind project in Taiwan. And then they moved to half, 23. And at the end, they made only 6 or 7. So you can see the gap between the ambitions and the reality. But they are starting. So they are learning. They are preparing the next steps. So it's just a matter of, again, we come back to a balance between what you can do and your expectations.
Okay. Do you agree with that, both of you? Or what would you
Yes,
say?
absolutely. And I join this analysis that, in fact, because it's a new industry, there is a lot of ambition of a lot of countries and people and companies. But we will see in the coming years what are the real facts. And I appreciate what you say, that finally, maybe we can struggle a lot against Asia, but maybe it's better for all of us to work together in a fair game. It's sometimes difficult to have a fair game, but okay, we can have this ambition today for that and to try to find these good solutions for all these new projects and all this energy that we all need.
What about you? Would you agree on?
Yeah, obviously. And one of the interesting topic on this is Taiwan is a good example of many other countries, is where we used to have an industry which was working in North Sea, basically. Mostly, nearly everything was happening there. Then China now is becoming big, and there are lots of different countries that are developing offshore wind. We heard about Colombia, for example, months ago. Every few months, there are new countries entering into offshore wind auctions, and then they will be entering into offshore wind supply chain, and so on and so on. So now the supply chain is evolving, and I do agree as well, is we don't need to fight against each other. We just need to increase the size of the pond. We need to increase the size of the market and to deliver more renewables. And that's by having a competitive market, competitive supply chain, and being able to deploy further.
Thank you. Sam, you're still with us. I thought you were gone. Thank you for bearing with us.
Still here.
Would you like to comment on that, or is there anything you'd like to ask your European colleagues?
To just comment on that, you know, we're almost closest to the Asian market here in the United States. We have our West Coast market, with California has a 25 gigawatt goal, and 2 to 3 more states. And it's going to be an interesting conversation. We've seen a ton of interest from Korea and Japan, especially on our West Coast, and you know, it's figuring out how to maximize, you know, our joint supply chain between our 2 countries to ensure that we're going to hit very ambitious targets. California or the West Coast likely won't even have their first project in the water until the mid-2030s, you know, early 2030s, mid-2030s. And it's going to ramp up from 0 to 25 gigawatts in just 15 years. It will be an impressive feat, and we'll need to pull on all of the Pacific supply chain to get it done.
Well, there are certainly bright days ahead, I hope. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating, and thank you for listening.
Mm-hmm.